I remember when I was in pre-K, I thought it was arbitrary that boys were supposed to like blue and girls were supposed to like pink, and I was a little contrarian. So I would say that I liked pink just to piss my in my head to piss my stupid teachers off and to show them that I understood all this stuff was arbitrary, just to be a little douchebag. I didn't actually like pink. I just liked to be, I just liked to show that arbitrary things were arbitrary as a 3 year old or 4 year old. Um, but basically, what I recall of the ethos of that time, which again, I grew up in a pretty progressive place, was there's no right way to be a boy. There's no right way to be a girl. If you want to be a girl and you love sports and you love cutting your hair short and you like roughhousing with the boys, that's a perfectly valid way to be a girl. We would have called it a tomboy. You're a tomboy. That's fine. If you want to be a boy and wear dresses, that's fine. That's a valid way to be a boy too. Um, One thing I and many other people have noted is that the attitude, the current attitude, especially among trans activists and progressives, seems to be importantly different in that if you display the stereotypical behaviors of the other sex, then perhaps you really are the other gender, right? Perhaps your gender identity is not a boy if you like to wear dresses, and that may seem like a distinction without a difference, but it could be material in that the latter attitude potentially puts you on a track for eventual medical transition and social transition and pronoun transition, whereas the first would put you on a track towards being, oh, Katie's a tomboy, she's a tomboy, and whatever attitude people have towards that. So I'm curious if you also observe that difference in philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is something I people are probably sick of hearing me complain about this. Yeah, in the first version of this, the way that you were raised and the way that I was raised, there was an expansion of the idea of gender roles. I think this was I think it's always been easier for girls, at least in my lifetime, to be gender nonconforming or gender role nonconforming. Because women wear pants, it is a little bit weirder for a boy to wear a skirt, and there's probably going to be some bullying that comes along with that. But yes, the whole idea, right? The whole idea was to expand what it meant to be a boy or what it meant to be a girl. Your sex doesn't define who you are or what you can do. And we've seen a retraction in recent years. I think the whole idea of non-binary is sort of a bristling against that. I still object to the idea of being non-binary because I think it's sort of a selfish individual act to say I'm opting out of gender roles, but you who are still female, you have not opted out of this. So I have some problems with that whole concept. But no, I think you're right, and this is something that people slightly older than me, people like Megan Daum, who's raised in the 70s, have talked about, in the 70s, this idea. Everybody wore overalls. It was this much more gender neutral. Today, it's really hard to find even children's clothes that are non-gendered. Toys are much more gendered. So I think part of this is market forces sort of imposing this on people. And this is not to say that I don't think there are actual differences between males and females. I think this is one of the things that I fight with feminists about. I think that there are some inherent differences, biological differences, that make men more prone to certain things and make women more prone to other things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yes, this idea that, you see this in the literature, like little kids' books. There'll be some kids book about that's sort of supposed to be, a pro-trans book, and in the book, there'll be a picture of a little boy who says that he doesn't like the color blue, and then all of a sudden he's a girl now, and I find that deeply regressive. Gender dysphoria, there's obviously a huge argument about this, but gender dysphoria, in my mind, is basically a medical condition. It's a mental health issue. It's something that people have had for a long time, and it typically emerges really young in life. I don't think that an infant could. There's some liberals and gender ideologues will say, babies can signal that they're born in the wrong body. I don't think babies can actually do that, but I think even perhaps toddlers can. they say things like, I wish that God had made me a boy, or I wish that God had made me a girl, or something like that. That's real, and the distress is real, and I think there should be adequate and evidence-based treatments for that. But there's this other thing going on, often called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is much more socially influenced. And a lot of people want to deny that this exists, but you can just look at the numbers, and you can look at the population of kids who are now showing up to gender clinics. It used to be there were more natal males, than girls would go to these clinics. In the past decade or so, as these numbers have spiked of patients appearing at these clinics, the vast majority of them are natal females. And so we're supposed to ignore that forever. It is known that girls, especially pubescent girls, are intensely subject to social pressure. It is very important for girls to fit in. When I was in high school, every other girl was anorexic, bulimic, or a cutter. That was the thing. The ones that weren't were goth, or maybe all of the above. But now it's become this. We've attached these identity labels to this thing, and once something becomes an identity, you can't question it. It becomes sacrosanct. So it makes the conversation intensely difficult to have because of the backlash and of course the allegations. If you question this stuff, that you are literally killing trans people, which I get quite often. Um, yeah, I think the vibe shift is coming, but over the last few years, we've seen just really some really bad ideas spread. I think especially among adolescents and children, the people who care for them.
So I want to read one statistic that blew my mind, and I believe I read this in Abigail Schreier's book. What was that book called?
Irreversible damage.
So, yeah, she wrote Irreversible Damage, I think last year, and it got banned from Amazon for a while, and I think later reallowed as an anti-trans bigoted book. But she basically is making the point you just made about rapid onset gender dysphoria, about the reality of social contagion. And like social contagion, this is, I mean, there's nothing unique uh, on the trans issue, on the point of social contagion. Social contagion we've been seeing on all kinds of issues. There was an Atlantic article a few months ago about an outbreak of social contagion of Tourette's syndrome mostly among girls and among girls that are on TikTok. There's these TikTok Tourette's influencers that will show you their Tourette's, their tics, and doctors around the country have been seeing an inexplicable rise in girls with Tourette's, and all of them are on TikTok, and there's really no other explanation other than that these girls are following Tourette's influencers on TikTok and then actually feel like they are basically catching the the tics from this influencer that's kind of this cool and like high status person. And it's, there's nothing. I worry sometimes about feeling like you're making fun of people that are caught in a social contagion or saying that they're mentally weak or something like that. It's really nothing like that. All it is basically the reverse of the placebo effect, right? Like, no matter how objective or reality based you think you are, I think the truth is, we know if we put you in a medical experiment and give you a sugar pill and you have a disease, it's there's a pretty good chance you're going to actually feel better getting a pill that has nothing in it. That's just a fact about human psychology. It's one of the weird things about us. And social contagion is nothing more than the placebo effect in reverse, which is to say, you end up feeling worse. You feel symptomatic of something, whether it's gender dysphoria or Tourette's, or there's been hiccups outbreaks. There's been all kinds of social contagion stuff. And you essentially get it as a consequence of your peer influences. So all of that is to preface this statistic I read in Abigail Schreier's book, which is from the American Association of plastic surgeons. The American Association of Plastic Surgeons reported the percent change in male to female gender confirmation surgeries and the percent change in female to male gender confirmation surgeries from 2016 to 2017. There was a 41% uptick in male to female surgeries and a 289% uptick in female to male surgeries in 1 year. So almost a tripling of people seeking to look more like men, but only a 41% increase in people wanting to look more like women, which is very strange because if it were only about society lowering the overall stigma on being trans, you wouldn't expect to see such massive differences by which way people are going. Whereas if it were about social contagion, which in almost every other case I've looked at, tends to hit women harder than men, this is more or less what you would expect to see.
Yeah, I think absolutely. There was a Pew came out with a study a couple weeks ago. About 5% of young adults in the US now consider themselves trans or non binary. That's a huge percentage. And it sort of flies in the face of this rhetoric that gay activists have repeated for a long time, born this way. And it's made me sort of change my mind about about that idea that, you know, sexuality and gender identity are something that you're born with. I think in genuine cases, yes, that's true, but I think there's something else going on here. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's bad if people medicalize a condition that they don't have, that they are going to regret later. That's certainly bad. But just inherently, humans are a mimetic species. Everything from fashion, music, the food we eat, the dog breeds that we have, the number of children that we have, all of these things are influenced. Our politics, the names that we give our children, all of these things are influenced by the people around us. That's just inherent to being a human. And we're supposed to pretend that this one aspect is somehow outside of that.
Yeah, so I guess I do feel there's a difference between sexuality and gender identity. And this, so like with sexuality, with my sexual orientation, you get evidence of exactly what you find attractive from your body. And it's actual evidence that is in principle observable by a third party, right? Like you could, and people have do weird studies where they show you porn and they like hook up electrodes to whatever and see what arouses you, right? And that's actually, which is not to say it's impossible to be confused or self-deceived about your sexuality, right? Like you can be all of those things, but at the end of the day, there is this literal physical reaction, almost akin to like an allergy. Like you can only deceive yourself about being allergic to peanuts for so long, even if it's a mild allergy. You can just run the test, and that's you get similar kind of evidence to what arouses you and what doesn't. Even if it changes over time. And the fundamental difference between sexuality and gender identity is that gender identity really seems like kind of just a conversation you're having with yourself in your own mind, and there's no real evidence to fall back on if you're confused about what you are. It's just kind of like it's a create your own adventure with no rules, and no one knows how many genders there are. And yeah, I guess it seems like in a condition of confusion, if you're confused about what your gender identity is, you're sort of going through it, you're finding yourself, it seems like there's very little solid ground to fall back on other than what you're feeling in the moment and who's around you and what kind of information you're consuming.
Yeah, gender identity itself is a relatively new concept. It came out of the 1960s. I'm not sure I actually believe in the concept of gender identity. I don't think that I have a gender identity. I know that I am female. I think that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition, but this has just been accepted, especially in recent years, that we all have this gender identity. It's like a soul, you know, it exists somewhere in the body or the brain, but nobody can point to exactly where. And it is reinforced by stereotypes or maybe relies on stereotypes.